December 7, 1941. 6:37 in the morning. Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii. Captain Joseph J. Rochefort is already underground. The basement of Building 1, 14th Naval District Headquarters, has no windows. The air is warm and thick with paper and cigarette smoke. Around Rochefort, radio operators and analysts work through the night's accumulated intercept traffic, sorting Japanese naval and diplomatic broadcasts into categories of urgency. Rochefort has been at this post for months. His unit, the Combat Intelligence Unit, exists for one purpose: to read what the enemy sends across open airwaves and determine what it means. At 6:37, a report arrives through naval channels. The destroyer USS Ward, on patrol outside the harbor entrance, has engaged a suspected submarine. Depth charges were dropped. A contact was made. The message moves upward through layers of duty officers and watchstanders. It requires confirmation. It requires assessment. The duty officer at 14th Naval District logs it and waits for follow-up. Rochefort does not command ships. He does not issue fleet orders. He reads signals, interprets them, and passes assessments to the command layer above. Right now, his picture of Japanese activity shows diplomatic traffic trending toward rupture and fleet broadcasts showing unusual silence where there should be routine traffic. That silence has been present for nearly 3 weeks. No general alarm is sounded at 6:37. The Ward's report is treated as an uncertain contact, possibly a mistaken identification, possibly a routine depth charge drop against a shadow in the water. It travels toward Admiral Husband E. Kimmel's duty staff, where it waits for confirmation that will never arrive in time. 6 miles north of the harbor entrance, the surface of the Pacific is undisturbed. That will not last. In late November 1941, Washington sent war warnings to Pacific commanders. The message was specific in its sense of danger and vague in its geography. Hostilities appeared imminent. The likely locations named were Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaya. The Japanese military had been pushing south through China and into Indochina for years. The logic of their expansion pointed toward British and Dutch colonial resources, not toward a heavily defended American naval base in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Rochefort's unit had been working through the Magic Intercept program, reading portions of Japanese diplomatic traffic with considerable success. The diplomatic codes had been broken. The content was alarming. On December 6th, a 14-part message from Tokyo to the Japanese embassy in Washington had been intercepted and partially decoded. The final part, instructing the ambassador to deliver a response to the American government at 1 p.m. Washington time on December 7th, would be intercepted and decoded hours later. That corresponded to early morning Hawaii time. Some officials in Washington would recognize the significance. The warning would not reach Pearl Harbor's operational commanders in time to change posture. But the diplomatic codes were not the operational codes. The Japanese Naval Code, designated JN-25, remained only partially broken. Rochefort's unit could read fragments, could identify patterns, but could not fully reconstruct the movement orders of the Japanese fleet. And in the final days of November, something changed in those patterns. The Japanese carrier force, which had been generating routine radio traffic identifiable by its call signs and transmission rhythms, went silent. Radio silence of this kind had precedent: fleet exercises, communications discipline during training maneuvers, reorganization before deployment. The absence of signal was interpreted cautiously. The carriers had not moved, most analysts believed, toward Pearl Harbor. The distances were too great, the approach routes too exposed, and the harbor itself, with its shallow basin, was considered an unlikely target for the weapon that would prove most lethal in the opening minutes of the attack. Torpedo bombers require deep water to operate effectively. Standard aerial torpedoes, dropped from aircraft at low altitude, or dive sharply before leveling off. In waters less than 40 feet deep, they strike the bottom before reaching a target. Pearl Harbor's deepest anchorages hold around 40 to 45 feet of water. By existing doctrine, torpedo attack was considered impractical. No anti-torpedo nets were deployed across Battleship Row. To prevent the possibility of infiltration and ground sabotage, American aircraft at Wheeler Field, Hickam Field, and Ford Island were parked in tight formation, wingtip to wingtip, grouped in the open where guards could watch them. This was the standard anti-sabotage configuration. It also meant that no aircraft could be scrambled quickly, and that a single bomb or strafing run could destroy multiple planes at once. The system was looking inward. Every defensive measure in place on the morning of December 7th was oriented toward a threat that would not come. 7:02. On a hilltop at Opana, on the northern tip of Oahu, 2 Army Signal Corps privates are operating a mobile radar unit. Private Joseph Lockard and Private George Elliott are using the equipment for a training session that was supposed to end at 7 o'clock. The regular information center at Fort Shafter that processes radar contacts has just closed for the morning. Lockard and Elliott continue on their own. The scope shows a return unlike anything they have seen. A formation 132 miles north of Oahu, inbound. The size of the blip indicates multiple aircraft, possibly a very large number. Lockard calls the information center. A duty officer, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, is the only person still present. Tyler has been told, or informally and incorrectly, that when B-17 bombers fly in from the mainland, Hawaiian radio stations broadcast music all night as a navigational beacon. The radio station has been broadcasting. Tyler concludes the return is the expected flight of B-17S from California. He tells Lockard not to worry about it. Lockard and Elliott watch the formation for another 40 minutes. It does not deviate. It continues closing. No radar warning reaches Rochefort. No urgent escalation moves through the signal chain connecting Opana to 14th Naval District to the fleet. The radar data, the most concrete physical evidence that something enormous and airborne is approaching the island from the north, sits inside an information system that is not equipped to process it correctly. The first wave of Japanese aircraft, 183 planes, though is now less than 90 miles from Oahu. Those aircraft departed from 6 Japanese carriers, codenamed Kido Butai, the strike force, under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. The carriers had sailed from Hitokapu Bay in the Kurile Islands on November 26th, maintaining strict radio silence throughout the transit. They communicated by signal flags and hand signals between ships. They sent no operational radio traffic. Their radio operators occasionally transmitted dummy traffic from Japanese home waters to maintain the impression that the carriers had not moved far north. The deception worked completely. When Rochefort's unit logged the disappearance of carrier traffic in late November, the absence was noted. It was ambiguous. Carriers could go quiet for many reasons. The assumption that they remained in Japanese home waters or were operating somewhere to the south, near the anticipated Southeast Asia thrust, seemed more consistent with the overall intelligence picture than the alternative, that they had turned east across the empty North Pacific toward Hawaii. No intercept confirmed the approach. No diplomatic message named Pearl Harbor. The intelligence fragments were real, but their weight was distributed incorrectly. 7:30. Japanese aircraft are now over the northern coast of Oahu. The formation divides into its attack components. Torpedo bombers descend to wave-top altitude over the western approach to the harbor. Horizontal bombers climb to their release altitude over the center of the island. Dive bombers position above Ford Island and the airfields at Wheeler and Hickam. Fighters deploy as top cover and ground strafing support. Below them, Pearl Harbor is at Sunday morning readiness. Roughly half the fleet's personnel are on shore leave. Aboard the battleships moored along the southeastern edge of Ford Island, known as Battleship Row, many crews are preparing for the morning routine. Colors, breakfast, inspection. Boilers on several vessels are cold or at reduced pressure. Bringing them to full steam requires hours. The ships are moored in pairs, outboard vessels blocking the inboard ones from easy escape into the channel. The anti-aircraft ammunition on multiple ships remains locked below decks. Peacetime protocol requires authorization to break open magazines in port. Some ships have ammunition at the ready. Many do not. Battery commanders are not at their stations. The watch is light. At 7:49, the Japanese air commander transmits the attack signal. 7:55, the first bombs fall on Ford Island's naval air station. The explosions are visible across the harbor. Simultaneously, torpedo bombers sweep low from the west, crossing Pearl City Peninsula, dropping altitude to between 50 and 100 feet above the water. The first torpedoes enter the harbor. American engineers had calculated that the shallow water would stop them. Japanese engineers had solved that problem months earlier. Wooden stabilizing fins, fixed to the tail of each torpedo, controlled the entry angle and prevented deep dives. The torpedoes leveled off in less than 30 feet of water and ran straight toward the hulls of the battleships. USS Oklahoma is struck by multiple torpedoes on her port side within the first 2 minutes. She begins to list immediately, or by 8:08 she has capsized, her hull above the waterline, hundreds of men trapped inside. USS West Virginia takes 7 torpedo hits. USS California takes 2. USS Nevada, at the northern end of Battleship Row, takes 1 torpedo hit and begins to flood. Inside the basement of Building 1, Rochefort is hearing reports in real time as they arrive. Air attack, torpedoes in the harbor, ships hit. The reports are fragmented, incomplete, arriving in no organized sequence. The duty communications are overwhelmed with simultaneous traffic. He is receiving pieces of a picture that he is only now beginning to assemble. The picture is not difficult to read once the pieces arrive together. He had been watching Japanese carrier traffic disappear 3 weeks ago. He had been tracking the diplomatic countdown to war. He had been reviewing the Ward's submarine contact an hour earlier. The radar return at Opana that was dismissed as B-17WS was not yet known to him, but it would become relevant in reconstruction. The carrier silence was not inactivity. It was concealment. The force that vanished from the radio picture did not go quiet because it was in port. It went quiet because it was moving and did not want to be found. The shallow harbor assumption was wrong. The torpedoes running through 40 feet of water toward the hulls of American battleships are proving it wrong at this moment, measured not in theory but in explosions. The Ward's contact at 6:37 was not an isolated incident. The submarine that the Ward engaged was a Type A midget submarine, one of 5 launched from large Japanese fleet submarines the previous night. They were advanced scouts and penetration assets for the attack. The Ward's report was not a false contact or a cautious overreaction. It was the first confirmed hostile act of the battle, reported accurately and then suspended in a confirmation loop that produced no action. At approximately 8:10, USS Arizona is struck. A bomb, likely armor-piercing, penetrates the forward deck and detonates inside the forward ammunition magazine. The explosion is not a fire that spreads. It is an instantaneous detonation of the ship's entire forward powder storage. Arizona's bow section is destroyed in less than a second. The ship sinks in 9 minutes. Over 1,177 men are killed in the explosion and the sinking, most of them with no warning and no possibility of escape. The column of black and orange smoke from Arizona rises to several thousand feet and is visible across the entire island of Oahu. Rochefort does not need to be on deck to know that what has just occurred cannot be undone. The Arizona's magazine has detonated. He knows what that means for the men aboard. He knows what it means for the fleet. By 8:10, the battle is already decided in its physical dimension. The question is no longer whether the attack will succeed. The question is how much further damage the second wave will add. At sea, approximately 230 miles north of Pearl Harbor, the 6 Japanese carriers of Kido Butai are turning into the wind to recover the first wave and launch the second. They are beyond the reach of any American aircraft currently airborne over Oahu. The American Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, the USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga, are not at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Enterprise is returning from Wake Island, approximately 200 miles west. Lexington is ferrying aircraft to Midway. Saratoga is on the west coast. The Japanese strike planners had intended to destroy the carriers alongside the battleships. Their absence from the harbor is either fortunate accident or inadequate intelligence, depending on the source consulted. What is confirmed is that the carriers are not present, and their survival will matter enormously in the months ahead. On the morning of December 7th, however, their absence provides no relief. They cannot be contacted and positioned in time to intercept the Japanese force. The attack will proceed and withdraw without challenge from American carrier aviation. 8:20. The anti-aircraft batteries around the harbor are beginning to return fire. The response is uncoordinated. Some crews have broken open ammunition magazines on their own authority, disregarding the peacetime authorization requirement. Others are still waiting for orders. The sky over Pearl Harbor fills with anti-aircraft bursts, but they are not concentrated or properly directed. Japanese aircraft continue their attack runs through the fire. At Wheeler Field, 12 miles north of Pearl Harbor, Japanese Zero fighters are strafing the rows of parked Army Air Forces planes. The P-40S and P-36S, packed together to prevent sabotage, are now being destroyed by the dozens from the air. Pilots who have reached the field sprint to their aircraft. Some manage to reach their planes. A handful get airborne. They engage the attackers. They are outnumbered and outgunned. Several American pilots are killed on the ground before reaching their cockpits. At Hickam Field, adjacent to the harbor on its southeastern edge, Japanese bombers hit the barracks and the flight line simultaneously. The air depot, the hangars, and the aircraft parked outside are struck in sequence. Fires spread through the fuel storage areas. The airfield's ability to generate an organized defensive response is degraded within the first 15 minutes of the attack. Rochefort's basement receives a continuous stream of reports. Wheeler is burning. Hickam is burning. Ford Island is under attack. Multiple battleships hit. He is cross-referencing what he is hearing now against what he has known for weeks. The silence of the Japanese carriers, the 14-part message, the Ward contact, given the diplomatic deadline set for 1 p.m. Washington time, which is now roughly 7:30 Hawaii time, already 30 minutes in the past. None of it was certain in advance. None of it pointed with absolute precision at Pearl Harbor, but all of it points here now, assembled in the wreckage of the first 40 minutes. At 8:30, USS Nevada, having taken one torpedo hit but still capable of movement, gets underway from her berth at the northern end of Battleship Row. She is the only battleship to get underway during the attack. Her crew, many called back from shore leave and still in civilian clothes, works to bring her south through the channel toward the harbor entrance. If she makes it to open water, she will at minimum be mobile. She will not be a fixed target. Japanese aircraft spot the moving battleship immediately. The second wave, now beginning to arrive over Oahu, concentrates significant attention on Nevada. Dive bombers attack her repeatedly as she moves down the channel. She takes multiple bomb hits. Her bow drops. She is in danger of sinking in the main channel, which would block the harbor entrance entirely and trap every other vessel inside. Rear Admiral William Furlong, whose flagship, the mine-layer USS Oglala, has already capsized alongside the light cruiser USS Helena, orders Nevada to beach herself. She runs aground near Hospital Point. The channel remains open, but Nevada's sortie is finished. The second wave of Japanese aircraft, 167 planes, arrives over Oahu at approximately 8:40. The targets are the airfields and whatever ships remain operational or repairable. Dive bombers strike the dry docks. The USS Pennsylvania in dry dock number 1 is hit. Destroyers Cassin and Downs, in the same dry dock, are destroyed by bombs and fire. At approximately 8:54, the destroyer USS Shore, in floating dry dock, is struck. Her forward magazine detonates in an explosion nearly as spectacular as Arizona's, sending debris thousands of feet into the air. Shore survives eventually and is repaired. At this moment, however, the explosion marks another point in a sequence of mechanical destructions that has been accelerating without pause for nearly an hour. Rochefort understands by this point that the attack is not going to be stopped by anything currently available to the harbor's defenders. Anti-aircraft fire is increasing. A small number of American fighters are airborne. But the Japanese force is too large, too coordinated, and too far advanced in its execution to be defeated by reactive fire from a force that had no warning of the attack's form or timing. The carriers are gone. The carrier radio silence that his unit had tracked and assessed as ambiguous has now been retroactively explained in the clearest possible terms. The force went silent because it was approaching. It approached without being detected because it chose a route across empty ocean to the north, outside normal patrol coverage, maintaining strict communication discipline for 11 days at sea. The intelligence picture did not fail because warning signals were absent. The diplomatic messages, the war warnings, the carrier silence, the submarine contact, the radar return, the ward's depth charges. These signals were all present. The system failed because the signals were distributed across multiple collection and analysis channels that were not synchronized with each other or with the decision layer above them. No single authority assembled the complete picture before the attack began. Each individual signal was insufficient on its own to compel a change in readiness posture. Taken together, they pointed directly at what was now happening. But they were never taken together in time. This is the structure of the failure. Not treachery, not ignored certainty, not deliberate negligence. Fragmented evidence, incomplete cryptanalysis, and a defensive framework built around a threat model that was incorrect. 9:30. The second wave is completing its attack profile. Dive bombers have worked over the airfields at Wheeler, Hickam, and Ewa Marine Corps Air Station. The number of serviceable American aircraft on Oahu has been reduced to a fraction of what it was 2 hours ago. Those that survived the initial strafing attacks on the ground face continuing attacks from the second wave. Crews attempting to rearm and fuel surviving aircraft work under fire. The anti-aircraft fire over Pearl Harbor has intensified significantly compared to the first minutes of the attack. More batteries are in action. Ammunition is being distributed. American gunners are adjusting to the attack geometry. Japanese aircraft in the second wave suffer higher attrition than those in the first. 29 Japanese aircraft are lost over Oahu, most of them in the second wave, compared to the essentially unopposed first wave. The defensive improvement is real, but it arrives too late to change the outcome. The battleships have already been struck. The airfields have already been hit. The irreversible damage occurred in the first 30 minutes. At approximately 9:45, the second wave withdraws. The last Japanese aircraft leave Oahu airspace, turning north toward the carriers. Within 2 hours, the attacking force will be recovered aboard its carriers. Kido Butai will reverse course and begin its transit back toward Japan. No American surface forces will intercept it. No American carrier aircraft will find it. It will return intact. The harbor below the departing aircraft is burning. Thick black oil from Arizona and other ships covers large areas of the water surface. The oil is on fire in places. Small craft move through the smoke looking for survivors. Thousands of men are in the water or trapped in flooded compartments below the waterline of capsized ships. Rescue operations have already begun. Sailors from undamaged ships go over the side to pull men from the burning oil. Divers begin the work of reaching men trapped inside Oklahoma's capsized hull. The sound of tapping from below the steel, men signaling their locations from inside sealed compartments, continues for days. Not all of them will be reached in time. At his station in the basement of Building 1, Rochefort's unit is now working in crisis mode. The intelligence picture has shifted entirely. The task is no longer tracking Japanese diplomatic breakdowns or monitoring fleet radio traffic for signs of imminent war. The war has begun. The task now is to determine where the Japanese carriers have gone, what their next objective will be, and how much of their force remains intact. The answers to those questions will shape the next 6 months of the Pacific War. The confirmed losses as tallied in the days that follow are precise and severe. 2,403 Americans are killed. Over 1,100 are wounded. 8 battleships are struck. Arizona is destroyed. Oklahoma capsizes and is never returned to service. California, West Virginia, and Nevada are sunk at their moorings but later raised and repaired. Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee are damaged. 3 cruisers are damaged. 3 destroyers are damaged or destroyed. The mine layer Oglala capsizes. The target vessel Utah, used for training, capsizes. 188 aircraft are destroyed. 159 more are damaged. Of the aircraft destroyed, the majority are lost on the ground in the first minutes of the attack. What survives matters strategically in ways not immediately visible on the morning of December 7th. The submarine base at Pearl Harbor is undamaged. American submarines, which will prove essential to the Pacific campaign, have their forward base intact. The fuel storage tanks holding over 4 million barrels of oil for the fleet are not struck. Japanese planners had considered them a priority target, but the attack commander, Admiral Nagumo, decided against a third wave that might have hit them. The dry docks, essential for repairing the damaged battleships, survive largely intact. The naval hospital, the ammunition storage facilities, the power generation infrastructure, all undamaged. The myth that developed over the years following December 7th, that American codebreakers had specific advanced knowledge of the attack and that warnings were deliberately suppressed, is not supported by the documented record. The magic program had broken Japanese diplomatic codes. The diplomatic messages were alarming and pointed toward imminent hostilities. They did not name Pearl Harbor as the target. The operational naval code JN-25 was not fully broken. Japanese carrier movements were concealed through radio silence that was effective against available interception methods. The failure was analytical, not suppressive. The intelligence community possessed genuine fragments of warning. It did not possess a complete and actionable picture of the attack. The distinction matters because it defines the nature of the lesson. The failure was not a single decision point where a correct reading of available evidence was rejected. It was a systemic failure to integrate multiple incomplete signals, distributed across separate collection channels, analyzed under a threat model built for the wrong contingency, and filtered through command structures that required confirmation before action. Each element of the failure was individually understandable. Their combination was catastrophic. December 8, 1941. The United States Congress, in joint session, receives a request from President Franklin D. Roosevelt for a declaration of war against Japan. The resolution passes the Senate unanimously. It passes the House with one dissenting vote, that of Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin of Montana. The United States is at war with Japan. 4 days later, on December 11th, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. fulfilling their treaty obligations to Japan under the Tripartite Pact. Roosevelt requests and receives declarations of war against Germany and Italy from Congress the same day. The United States is now in the war in both the Pacific and in Europe. The policy of non-intervention, maintained with increasing difficulty through 1940 and 1941, is finished. The country's industrial capacity, its military manpower, its strategic geography, all of it now turns toward a global conflict that will not end for nearly 4 more years. The naval consequence is immediate and structural. The battleship, which had dominated naval doctrine since the age of Mahan and Tirpitz, is revealed as secondary. The aircraft that destroyed the Pacific Fleet's battle line were not fired by opposing battleships, and they were delivered by carriers. The attack on Pearl Harbor is executed by carrier aviation against an anchored fleet. The ships that survived the attack with their fighting capacity intact are the carriers, which happen to be at sea. The ships that were destroyed or disabled are the battleships, which were at anchor. This is not a coincidental outcome. It is the validation of an argument that had been made by air power theorists for 2 decades. The aircraft carrier, operating at ranges far beyond the horizon, carrying aircraft capable of striking targets from the sky, has demonstrated a decisive advantage over the surface combatant limited to gun range. The Pacific War that follows Pearl Harbor will be, in its decisive engagements, a carrier war. Midway, the Coral Sea, the Philippine Sea, later Gulf, the outcomes of these battles will be determined by aircraft launched from carriers, not by the exchange of gunfire between battleships. Rochefort's unit will directly shape one of those outcomes. In the spring of 1942, working in the same basement with the same team, breaking the same JN-25 code that had concealed the Pearl Harbor attack, Rochefort and his analysts will detect Japanese preparations for an offensive in the Central Pacific. They will identify the target, codenamed AF in Japanese naval messages, as Midway Atoll. They will do so through a carefully planned deception. The Midway garrison broadcasts in the clear that its water distillation plant has broken down. Japanese intercept stations pick up the message and report that AF is short of fresh water. The deception confirms the target identification. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet after Kimmel's relief, will position American carriers at Midway based on Rochefort's intelligence. On June 4, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, American dive bombers destroy 4 of the 6 Japanese carriers that attacked Oahu, including 3 of the 6 that participated in the December 7th strike. The Japanese carrier force that had approached Pearl Harbor in silence, that had remained invisible until its aircraft were over the harbor, loses the core of its striking power in 5 minutes of diving attacks. The lesson Rochefort's unit drew from December 7th was not simply that vigilance required improvement. It was that silence carries meaning. The absence of signal is itself a signal. When the Japanese carriers disappeared from radio traffic in late November 1941, the ambiguity of that silence was processed as a reason for caution rather than alarm. After December 7th, the same unit would treat similar silence as an indicator of concealment, not inactivity. The analytical posture changed. The methods for exploiting what was known, including deliberate deception to confirm what was suspected, became standard. At Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7, 1941, the warning existed in fragments. The Ward contact, the Opana radar return, the diplomatic deadline, the carrier silence, the 14-part message. Each was a piece of a picture that assembled into certainty only after the first bombs fell. The system that might have connected those fragments in time did not function at the speed the situation required. The defensive posture configured for the expected threat was turned entirely the wrong way. The aircraft came from the north. They came at dawn. They came in numbers that overwhelmed a harbor in peacetime configuration. They used a weapon, the shallow water torpedo, that American doctrine had declared ineffective in those waters. They arrived unannounced through a radar contact that was misidentified in the 4 seconds of decision time available to a duty officer who had been given inaccurate information about incoming aircraft. And Rochefort, in the basement of Building 1, received the confirmation of what had happened the only way that the system allowed, after the bombs were already falling. Recognition arrived minutes before irreversible loss. Those minutes did not close.